Here you go, sir. A king-size
Soulless Spongebob Netflix movie.
on a stick.
Thanks.
They're sickening.
The terrible Sandy Cheeks movie. Let's do a deep dive into this, shall we? SpongeBob is a property that is very much getting run into the ground at this point. I don't mean that's a secret by any stretch. And to be fair, I haven't watched much of the new cartoons. Maybe they're okay. However, what I can safely say, from experience that I have directly witnessed, the movies are just a massive load of tartar sauce. With each installment, they just seem to be getting worse. And let me tell you, this year's The Sandy Cheeks movie is us hitting bikini rock bottom. I really thought the worst one being a backdoor pilot for Nickelodeon's Muppet Baby ripoff Camp Coral was going to be the low point. But no, I was wrong. This is the new low point. The other movies at least still felt like SpongeBob. This movie completely abandons the style of humor that made this thing a success in the first place. Even before its release, the marketing choices alone were bizarre. Like, do you remember this? Did you see any of these posters? As like most terrible movies, this was releasing on Netflix, and thus they gifted the world with these tie-in posters. I mean, I know this is meant to be a pastiche of Love is Blind, but it kind of looks like SpongeBob's on Naked Attraction at this point. Which leads me on to the other thing. They really tried to take emphasis off of Sandy in promoting this Sandy Cheeks movie. This character's had a rough ride, I tell you. In the original SpongeBob movie, she's completely sidelined with only 2 lines in the whole movie.
I don't need to.
And then, a full 20 years later, she finally gets her own movie and they completely retitle it. Notice the huge Saving Bikini Bottom, complete with tiny subheading, The Sandy Cheeks Movie. Ouch. Add in the fact that in all of these posters, SpongeBob has equal billing in the marketing of her own movie, and it's just not a great time to be the show's only principal female character.
This is a load of barnacles.
Yes! I mean, I get the logic that attaching the main character can help boost the movie, but then in that case, what was the point in even making a solo Sandy Cheeks movie? Well, as we'll soon get into the film itself chronologically, we will come to learn there wasn't any point. We open with SpongeBob in a lab. Oh, sorry, that's just the Nickelodeon Movies logo. Doesn't hold a candle to... Anyway, we actually open with the classic SpongeBob establishing shot of Bikini Bottom, which visually looks pretty great in 3D animation. Initially, it looks like the interesting animation from Sponge on the Run is in fact back, i.e. the only part of that movie I actually liked, but then...
Good morning, Bikini Bottom!
Oh God, is she gonna be that loud for the whole movie? Regardless, we quickly discover the character animation is in fact not the same animation at all. It's definitely hoping that you buy into it as an extension of that animation. It's not. The budget has definitively declined for this one, which, when we get into the scale of this movie's story, it's going to become a bit of an issue. We continue with another robot invention, like the Aquafina one she had in the last movie. Makes sense. We know she invents stuff. That's like the entire character. And then we get into what initially looks like a throwback to When I Lived in Texas song.
Well...
Oh, no. Unfortunately not. This is more of a quickly set up the character song, but in more of a way that a kid's sticker book would summarize her, as opposed to any more emotional insight, which would be welcome when she's the main character for this. All the characters joining in too, it's all very preschool. Is this another Camp Coral tie-in or something? In the cartoon, there is a precedent for song numbers that are deliberately corny or lame with a bit of tongue-in-cheek. However, usually you have both the zany animation and tone of the show on your side. This doesn't have that sense of irony. It's a bad song, and there's nothing much to it.
Ooh, I'm doing science every day.
It feels more like a theme song for a Sandy spin-off show on Nick Jr. And sadly, I think this is probably the approach to the SpongeBob IP in general nowadays.
You have my heart.
Anyway, the song stops and then... Wow, we're 4 minutes in and with only a song telling us about Sandy, and Bikini Bottom's immediately taken away.
What's happening?
They're really blasting through this one. I'm all for going against what people expect from how a story's put together. It's not like 10 minutes of the status quo is an obligation. However, I feel like this just skips a whole chunk of movie that they just couldn't be bothered with. Sure, most people watching this have seen SpongeBob, so understand the world and characters, but when you're making a side character the protagonist, it'd be nice to just see a slice of her life to get kind of a character arc going, you know? You can't just do a song that goes, "Hi, I'm Sandy and I like science," and then go straight to, "Oh no, the entire city is being pulled out of the ground." As I always say, even when you're making this for kids, they deserve better storytelling. Plus, this does nothing to keep the older fans who have kids invested either. We also see that SpongeBob has now gone from regular idiot to super idiot. I guess that's just what they do when Patrick's out of the picture. Just give him all the stupid stuff instead. I wouldn't be surprised if initially it was Sandy and Patrick before executives were like, "No one's watching this if the sponge isn't in it." You could airlift a lot of SpongeBob's lines, give them to Patrick, and it would still make perfect sense. It would certainly make things clearer that this is a Sandy Cheeks movie. I know SpongeBob is allowed stupid moments, but he's kind of next level just from this opening scene. I still can't believe I'm even calling this the opening scene. Just a quick musical number to say hi and off we go! The classic Texas episode gives us more character investment in her in 6 minutes than this does across an entire feature film.
It's Sandy. I wanna wake up in Texas.
In other words, it doesn't take long to do. Maybe re-establishing that arc with a quick scene or even just a quick gag would have been good. Classic SpongeBob shenanigans, you know? Already, you can see why Saving Bikini Bottom became the main header. Sandy Cheeks will be diluted as much as possible.
My leg!
Really had to shoe that one in early doors, didn't they?
My other leg!
Give them time, and I bet they'll get every token SpongeBob joke in at this point. I mean, I guess it's classic shenanigans, but I was hoping for more than just references. I wanted vibes. All the panicking from the characters has a weirdly awkward execution here as well.
Don't panic, anyone! Does Patrick have gas again?
It all sounds kind of off, you know? There's a sort of insincerity to it all. And as the whole town gets lifted away, this is what SpongeBob has to say on the matter.
Streaming videos on demand. I can't demand them anymore.
I guess this is the tier of jokes we're sticking with. And he absolutely has a tantrum over specifically that point. Tears spurting and everything. Remember when SpongeBob's humor had an otherworldly quality with next to no pop culture references? I don't know what the show's up to nowadays, but this was a thing in the last movie as well. Anyway, cue more tier-based cartoon antics that probably would have come across funnier in the normal animation style.
Come on, SpongeBob. You're coming with me.
Wow, they're really just getting on with this, aren't they? No time to take that in for a second. They jump on a volcanic geyser that turns up where Bikini Bottom was. Convenient. To be fair, we've had so many long journeys to get anywhere in these movies, I can see why the change of pace was needed.
Enough! You both are barnacles on me brain!
Although don't worry, like what feels like with every other SpongeBob movie, this does eventually descend into a road trip. In case you thought an original story idea was ever turning up. Now, once again, we're going with the premise that something's been taken and it's time for SpongeBob and another character to go and save it. Formula to a T. Also, you'll soon learn that SpongeBob making all these random hyperactive noises over Sandy happens throughout the entire movie. He is absolutely insufferable in this at times. There will be dialogue going on, and he's just sort of making these noises over it. The writers have no idea what to do with him. Yeah, Sandy's just Iron Man now.
I am Iron Man.
I don't really have an issue with this. It's an interesting thing to do with her diving suit, really. She even has a hologram writing thing. Nice to see the 14 hours later time card pop up too. There's at least some SpongeBob personality in this.
14 hours later.
And actually, I really like the gag where the view of the land from the plane is a map. Also, yeah, they're in the surface world full-time now. This really should have been the movie called Sponge Out of Water in hindsight. And then we have a cut back to the kidnapped Bikini Bottom.
Go home, you pointy pinky racer head!
Okay. At times, it feels like they just don't have a handle on the chaotic side of SpongeBob humor. Like, the writers are legitimately just winging it more than I've ever seen before. This is like a breakdown on the big screen, but it's been shoved over to Netflix instead. And now, oh look, live action characters. including that guy who turns up as the same gormless character in everything. I'm calling him out now, whether it's Stranger Things, Free Guy, or even Fallout this year. He is always there. You know your career options are narrow when even your Wikipedia page says he is usually typecast as nerds or individuals with socially awkward traits illustrating American quiche culture. I haven't made that up. That's literally what it says when you Google him. Matty Carterople's the name, by the way. I'm gonna remember Matty now. Not by choice, but by sheer exposure. Anyway, it's here we discover Bikini Bottom is a laboratory, which honestly is a great premise for a SpongeBob movie that's wasted on a Netflix film that they didn't make a big deal about, nor is it very well made, alas this video, but this is legitimately solid escalation for the movies, now bringing the characters into the real world in an interesting way that should feel like higher stakes, except it all takes place in this one room with 3 principal human characters, so it doesn't. As becomes more apparent as we go on,
Stop using my DVD drive to heat toaster pastries.
these lab scenes feel more like they've been filmed on the set of a kids' science TV show, with super basic camera work to match. For a show that's made its name on gags that used super intense shots and angles, there is absolutely no attempt in matching that with how this show has been filmed. Honestly, this is a thing that I can only describe as Paramount in tone, because the Knuckles series is also done by Paramount and has some of that same acting style.
You gonna rescue him?
He must learn to rescue himself.
It's like somehow the fingerprint of this terrible kids studio bleeds into the performance of what would otherwise be pretty successful actors. Yes, I'm looking at you, Matty. You may only have one joke, but it's been enjoyed a few times.
SpongeBob and Sandy Cheeks are currently missing.
I'm sure there's an explanation later, believe it or not, there actually is one, but it's kind of jarring that they just know their names like that, you know? Like, there's not even, like, a semblance of, like, mystery of why they know the names, it's just, oh, we're just diving right into it now. And it's about to get a whole lot worse.
Missing? Who's missing?
What is happening? You know it's bad when you're getting second-hand embarrassment on behalf of the actors. And I take no pleasure in saying that about Wanda Sykes, but look, it's not her greatest day at the office here. They kind of build up this introduction like a song number's about to kick off with fish models from the ceiling and everything, but she just kind of awkwardly struts in and the music just crunkily fades out. It's such a weird beat, man. So yeah, here's our main villain, and somehow the Cyclops from the first movie, without any dialogue, has more going for them than this lady. I get it, you're brought onto a movie of a, for all intents and purposes, a kid's cartoon. Your natural inkling is to ham it up. However, you can tell throughout that she's trying to play this kind of character with no guidance from the director of what tone she's meant to be striking.
Tell Cuda here who's missing.
As a result, it kind of reads as a bad SNL sketch where a Power Rangers villain is playing a corporate CEO. Wow, that's a first. SpongeBob ripping off The Simpsons. That's just an ugly CG version of Blinky the Fish. Careful guys, Disney owns that now, and they have lawyers to burn. Back to SpongeBob and Sandy, they're now wandering around Texas, and one positive thing I have is that they don't neglect the fact that SpongeBob needs water. Plus, I don't actually mind that a lot of the dehydrated poses he makes are from the original series. It's a fine line between unoriginal and fan service, and sometimes they hit it, sometimes they don't. Huh, snakes as cowboys? Sure, that checks out. I can buy that as a premise. Sandy suddenly pulling a Kill Bill. Okay, it's another pop culture reference I can do without, but this bit's fun with the snake going inside SpongeBob? Interesting. It's a serviceable enough fight scene before we get Sandy's family.
Well, look at who's back.
Nice. Would have been nice to have had that set up in the status quo we didn't get, but I guess Sandy's arc begins 20 minutes into this movie. I'm only kidding, they don't get a proper arc at all in their movie. Initially, it looks like it's just the Mario-coded dad, but the whole lot turn up to fight these snake guys. As for the family themselves, I didn't really leave this movie remembering much about them, but I don't necessarily have any complaints. However, as they drive off, it turns out that they all make the annoying sounds like SpongeBob.
Let's roll!
5 hours later.
I may actually have to get some sensory earplugs to watch the rest of this movie. Otherwise, it's another SpongeBob road trip scene. Told ya. And if you need a break from them going for the same concept for a third SpongeBob movie now, it's time for a palate cleanser more of the lame villain.
I want that sponge!
I have no idea what this character is meant to be. In a movie version of a cartoon, the approach of playing it like a cartoon villain could definitely be the way to go. I'm thinking of Steve Martin in Looney Tunes Back in Action.
He must not find the location of the diamond before we do.
However, in order to forgive the complete lack of a solid character, you've got to at least give her some funny lines, you know? Not just different ways of saying, "Get me that sponge." We then get yet another movie using a lo-fi looking commercial to explain the corporate villain's plan, with the same Hanna-Barbera style animation take as that of the Chicken Run 2 scene. Except this time, we're cloning characters to death instead of turning them into nuggets. I'd say Aardman should be suspicious how similar this scene is, but they're working with Netflix too, and I guess Netflix can't sue themselves. It's not all a rip-off of that scene though, with some of the infomercial just kind of looking awful. It's kind of made to look like it has viral internet trash qualities, but by someone who is completely out of touch with that culture. It just sounds like Nickelodeon as a company in general, to be honest. Seeing as they couldn't be bothered to put much into the execution of the villain, they just use this infomercial to explain the entire villain's plot. But anyway, we then learn that the grand plan is to put the Bikini Bottom residents into a soda stream looking thing so they can breathe on land and then mass clone them so they can be sold as pets. Yeah, that's what we're going with. And for whatever reason, the core cast of SpongeBob SquarePants, which as far as I can see, doesn't exist as a globally recognized cartoon character in this universe, are now the star attractions that are going to make her millions. And seeing as how he's otherwise doesn't have a role in this movie but be amongst the town that has been kidnapped, we also get a brief cut to Plankton to give his thoughts on the cloning plotline. And no, I'm afraid he doesn't call it out as it being really dumb. Instead, we see his various attempts at cloning himself, including an Abraham Lincoln version. No need, Plankton. We've already got a mutated clone of you for a president. Again.
Yes! Doom! Terror!
Find me that sponge!
Again, this is most of her dialogue. Back with the Cheeks, we learn some stuff about the family. Namely, that they have a family circus. And to be fair, I probably will need to rewatch Madagascar as a palate cleanser after this, so thank you, movie.
Polka dot, afro!
Really?
Also, shock, horror, some attempt at a character arc for Sandy with her family here, and some indication of why she left them for Bikini Bottom.
First Granny, then me, then you.
Why is that familiar?
Not me, not Hermione, you.
As clear from the rest of the family sticking together as one unit, there's pressure on Sandy to stay with the herd and run the family business, which is a great angle of expanding her backstory in a way that's consistent with the series. Why isn't this the focus of the movie? This scene is pretty much the most we get of this before we're launched right back into the cloning Bikini Bottom for pets storyline. And I think there's a version of this movie where these two do work well together. We know from Sandy's backstory two major things. She's a scientist from the surface on a research project, and she left her family in Texas. There's a solid movie in those two plot points which can put the focus on Sandy as a protagonist. You can still have these stakes whilst giving Sandy a solid emotional arc. Unfortunately, the movie I'm describing is the Sandy Cheeks movie, Saving Bikini Bottom, when we actually got Saving Bikini Bottom! A Sandy Cheeks movie. Hey there, you made it halfway through this video, so come along and subscribe if you haven't already. And let's get back to the second half of the video. We actually got Saving Bikini Bottom! A Sandy Cheeks movie, you know, bit of a difference. The story is there, but Nickelodeon clearly have no confidence on putting too much focus on Sandy in her own movie. Which begs the question, what was the point in even making this? It still would have been a bad movie, but at least if you just titled this as another SpongeBob movie, we may have walked away from this one appreciating that there was some focus on Sandy. I don't think people would say it's false advertising if you suddenly focus on another character. However, particularly seeing how integral SpongeBob comes to the third act as a Sandy Cheeks movie, this ain't it.
She can do whatever she wants as long as it's in Texas.
Yes, we've seen this overbearing parent trope a million times before, but at least it shows some semblance of an attempt at an emotional conflict. It's hard to not spot the missed opportunity here. And the most frustrating thing here is, this is a franchise that has pulled it off before. The first SpongeBob movie was about having both the hilarious and wide-scale plotline whilst also maintaining an emotionally focused character arc. Just like SpongeBob goes from struggling with his immaturity to ultimately embracing who he is, this movie should have had that focus on Sandy working out the balance between her independence and her family. They don't have the excuse that SpongeBob is a cartoon, so it's hard to add feature-length dimension to a character from a 10-minute cartoon because it's literally been done before. In fact, they did it 20 years before this one. When this raccoon turns up as well, it just reminds me that the animation here is not settling with me either. I think specifically how the animated characters blend in with the live action environment is the problem. To put it simply, they don't. Honestly, the cartoon versions of these characters would have worked a lot better. Maybe it's just me, but the appeal of seeing a sort of worlds collide premise of cartoon characters entering the real world comes from them looking like they do in the cartoons. Kind of like when Jimmy Neutron met Timmy Turner and they crossed over into each other's art styles. It was cool to see their actual art styles, even if it was reflected into somebody else. We wouldn't have wanted a weird third design that's a blending of the two to make it work. That's just so diluted. And here, it kind of just all blends into this one ugly, oversaturated half real world. And just as I zone into the things that disappoint me about this movie, we're back to the villains.
Maybe this is one of those scary sleep movies.
Has Patrick been watching ASMR? In another unconvincing outburst, Tsunami, yes, that's genuinely the character's name, elects to shake a mini-apocalyptic event into Bikini Bottom.
My leg again!
Oh, they really just want to obliterate the reputation of this joke, don't they? Oh, give me strength, and they've even given her a pug as a Dr. Evil cat. There's classic moustache-twirling villain, and then there's a hollow avatar of a classic moustache-twirling villain. I'm really struggling for compliments, but I guess the fish food resembling Krabby Patties is kind of creative. It kind of marries together the look of real fish food with what the in-universe characters eat, so it's a nice enough detail. Of course, this is a trick, and to everyone's surprise, the 3 remaining main characters are chosen as the first test subjects of the soda stream. Now able to breathe on the surface, man, this plot is so dumb. It's not really made clear if this means they can no longer breathe underwater. Squidward, sort of seeming happy about this, then leads us into another terrible song that they only do one verse of as they know it's terrible too. Complete with him dancing around a Singing in the Rain lamppost in a song that sounds nothing like it, but I guess is probably a reference to how he's now out of the water?
I'm breathing air. How the oxygen.
There's about 3 song numbers in this that they only half commit to for less than half a minute. All put together with the mindset of the campfire song is a fan favorite, so we have a license to make every song have the same deliberately on-the-nose quality. Unfortunately for them, the campfire songs still adheres to the basic rules of songwriting. Enter the worst children ever.
Bring in the focus group.
Time for those noise-sensitive earplugs again. Honestly, if you wanted to slow down the global birth rate, just rickroll everyone with this one clip. In fact, Durex should probably just play this clip and use it for their adverts at this point. I know this is going for the horror Toy Story 3 nursery scene, but considering Patrick is an actual creature and not a toy, them stretching him here is actually kind of horrific. Which is weird because much worse happens to him in the cartoons, but putting him into this real world setting, seeing this 3D version of him being stretched apart by 2 live action children is kind of nasty. Well, that is kind of what post-classic SpongeBob loved to do, the gross out humor, so it's on brand, I guess. It's just on the wrong brand. Meanwhile, the Cheeks family are being chased down by the police.
Uh-oh, that's the fuzz.
After years of this band of squirrels operating a vehicle around Texas without trouble, suddenly, it now becomes a problem. To get them away before it's too late, the Cheeks put Sandy and SpongeBob into their circus cannon, and with one quick line from her mum,
I just want to say...
You can tell us the next time you visit.
that arc of Sandy's boundaries with her family is seemingly resolved. No big moment of Sandy having to face up to her mum on the issue or nothing. Her mum just sort of changes her tune in the heat of the moment. In other words, the closest we have to an internal conflict for Sandy lasts for about 10 minutes in the midpoint of the movie. Now we gotta stick with the terribly acted clone Bikini Bottom villain plotline. No need to get into Sandy's clearly complicated relationship with her family any further. And here we go to the water park scene from the trailers where SpongeBob tickles people's feet. Whatever floats your car, my guy. Turns out, it's an incredibly brief part of the movie.
Those grippers late!
Those dogs are barking.
But the fun doesn't last for long as the villain's pug turns up. Honestly, I initially thought this was just a random pug just getting super worked up over SpongeBob and Sandy, as I'd forgotten that was what was on her lap. I was kind of disappointed when I did remember, as the idea that it's just a random pug was actually kind of funny. And the dog drowns. Oh, no, not really, he's back. Oh, he's now stuck in a drain with no obvious way to recover him. And now the drain's filling up. The dog drowns. And through the drain pipe, there they are, with relatively little peril, they've gotten to the lab. If only Shell City was that easy in the first movie. This is a classic misstep with basic storytelling. For anyone who's seen what South Park creators Trey Parker and Matt Stone have to say on narrative principles, you always need to look at your story points and make sure each step goes, this happens because this happens, and therefore this happens. So far in this Sandy Cheeks movie, we've just had a straight run of this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. It's just not interesting. Even for the young audiences this is intended for. It's just been, they landed in Texas, and then they faced some snakes, and then the Cheeks family conveniently showed up in the exact same spot, and then they were driving along with the Cheeks family. You see what I mean? Getting to the lab, they are then immediately captured, of course. And Sandy's faced with what transpires to be her old scientist ex-buddies. And considering how Sandy's science cohort have always been left ambiguous in the show, this is a massive anticlimax, really. There's one episode of the show where she gets visited by the firm, and they are monkeys. British monkeys. The leader being voiced by comedy legend Rick Mile, or for you guys in the States, Drop Dead Fred. The concept of a bunch of scientific land mammals having an organization surveying undersea life was a pretty cool idea to see in the show, and that's the kind of thing I would have loved to have seen more of for that organization. This one white room with these one-note human villains is such a dissatisfying retcon of the backstory implicated in that episode. Why does this otherwise completely human-operated laboratory have one squirrel employee? Having an organization that was made up of multiple animal scientists would have both made more sense for Sandy's backstory and probably been a lot more interesting than the Wanda Sykes tantrum machine we got. And I mean machine more literally than you think. But first, we have a deep fake flashback with Wanda Sykes' head superimposed onto a child actor. It's horrific. I get it's done deliberately to look funny, but the problem is, it isn't funny. It just looks like a bad special effect. When your CGI in a 2024 movie is outshone by Spy Kids, you know you're doing something wrong. However, the tragic backstory that unfolds is not the fact that this child was born with the green screen face of a 60-year-old comedian. No, it's just the fact that she couldn't cuddle sea creatures in bed because they kept dying. Oh my god, someone call the Pixar theory, guys. I think they just found the adult version of Darla from Finding Nemo. She even says in this scene that she comes from a wealthy family. You know who makes a lot of money in this world? Dentists! Anyway, just as you think we've seen the last of Wanda Sykes having her head badly imposed onto another body, this happens.
That little girl?
Yep, losing her original body through her fish-hugging antics, her face is now all that's left and the rest of her is a robot. To be fair, I wasn't expecting that. It looks awful, but it is a surprise. We're fully into Spy Kids territory now. If you've removed all shots of SpongeBob characters, I'd have bought that this is a Spy Kids movie. We then get the reveal that the reason why they are so familiar with all the characters is that this was secretly why they sent Sandy down there all along. Again, this is a great premise and twist for Sandy's story. It's just completely wasted on these villains. Imagine if they had gone with that multi-species science hub, and then we got some flashbacks of Sandy being friends with her fellow scientists, and then we got this moment where they turn on her, revealing that her entire time assigned to Bikini Bottom was all part of this plan. That would have genuinely been a solid emotional beat for her as a character, and this moment where her entire presence in the series is turned on its head would have been genuinely impactful. But who am I kidding? This was just pooped out by Nickelodeon so they could taste some sweet Netflix $. Instead, we get this weird reaction from the other characters that's half played as the big betrayal moment, but not fully, as it's quite clear she had no idea about any of this. It's yet another awkwardly executed attempt at emotion, which should have been so much more. Ah well, let's kill SpongeBob. Yep, they put SpongeBob in the cloning machine where it's established that all of the clones of SpongeBob will also entail the original SpongeBob getting broken apart. And that's exactly what happens. Sorry, kids.
Do not pop SpongeBob. It's the only thing I'll ever ask of you.
They really thought they'd get away with this dialogue just because Mr. Krabs is saying it. They don't. Clancy Brown is trying his best with what he has, but it just comes with a really strange vibe where all of his lines are just kind of re-emphasizing what's happening in the plot.
Do not give it a little time for them to grow.
See what I mean? However, as SpongeBob is completely broken up into the mini ones, the machine gets knocked over.
That is a SpongeBob spill on aisle 5.
And as the little SpongeBobs start running around and talking, the voice kind of sounds like they've also minion coded him. You've got loads of little yellow characters running around. It's gonna happen, I guess. With a little pep talk from one of the Sponge minions, Sandy gets mad and uses her hamster wheel to enter final battle mode now.
You're gonna pay for those crimes, Pinhead!
Oh, this is so bad. Man, I hope Wanda Sykes can at least walk away from this with a decent paycheck. On paper, I'm sure the memo, "we want you in the new SpongeBob movie," sounded like a great idea. One moment you're signed on to be the villain in a movie of a world-famous IP, the next you're a head on a robot, unconvincingly fighting a squirrel. How the mighty can fall. Oh god, why? Obviously, after the first Netflix-released SpongeBob movie, I didn't have a lot of hope for this one. The marketing choices and the title change just worsened it further. But still, I would have loved to have been surprised here. Indeed, I have to say, this is the worst of these SpongeBob movies. Pardon the pun, but it is a shell of what SpongeBob was in its glory days. I wasn't expecting much, and it still managed to disappoint me. Mainly because I could see how, within this dreadful movie, there was a solid idea for a Sandy Cheeks story. The reveal that her transfer to Bikini Bottom was all part of a scheme the whole time? Great idea! And as a kid, I'd always wanted an episode where they went to Texas. But cut to 2024, and I got a whole movie of that, and it is awful. And of course, the full irony of villains trying to take the SpongeBob brand and clone it a million times to put it as far out as possible in a way that the characters don't want to be cloned and re-commercialized for the profiting of a corporation is completely lost to a company like Nickelodeon, Paramount, and Netflix. Even just seeing Steven Hillenburg's name in the credits makes me sad. He created something that defined a whole generation with an original sensibility in humor and animation. However, now he's no longer with us. There's no true creative voice behind it anymore. It's just the character designs and voice actors being used as a front for an empty brand being puppeted by committee. Give it another 20 years and we'll be looking at a smiling sponge that is no more than a symbol. And then into this awkwardly animated dance with Wanda Sykes trying to look like her head is reacting to the robot body that wasn't there when she recorded it. I'm guessing the writers went with the logic that it worked with the Gooby Goober Rock song, so it should work here. Just comparing the two scenes makes me sad for the whole SpongeBob franchise. Instead, it's just kind of a worse version of the Kraken scene in Hotel Transylvania 3. And I don't even like that movie either. We've seen the climax resolves itself with the characters awkwardly trying to join with a dance number trope a million times over, and the 1,000,000th time here is just as uninspiring. And then... murder! Wow, not even Plankton gets done that dirty. Not to mention, we instead get the final form of her horrifically green screen head. It's somehow now become one with the mutant fish. Of course, that's the villain arc resolved, I guess. And I'd say what happens next, but we have the continuing commentary of Mr. Krabs to fill in the gaps anyway.
If you squish them together, the little SpongeBobs reconstitute.
They really didn't even try with his character in this movie. On the other hand, Squidward's sheer joy in squishing tiny SpongeBobs is probably the closest to funny we get in this. Of course, they weren't just gonna let the Cheeks family not pop up again. Here they are, wrangling the tornado from earlier. Again, this is a tornado that only appears for the plot reason and appears in the same place twice because they went to the same location. It's stupid. I hate this tornado, man. As for how they escaped the police, just accept it. It happened off screen. It's fine.
Not unless you call society and all its rules a jail.
Hold up, we got Cedric the satirical squirrel over here. As they try to band together as the fishbowl containing Bikini Bottom starts to crack, the turned good lab assistants just kind of watch. Like they're not the ones that got it in this room in the first place. You'd at least think they have an inkling of how to move this giant fishbowl.
How about 2 families
Two families?
On to full Fast and Furious territory, Sandy is of course referring to the SpongeBob gang as her family now. But this time with...
I'm doing science every day.
I'm not sure what happens has anything to do with science, but that's SpongeBob for you. Indeed, she uses the obvious solution of using both families to create an electrical supercharge to send the fishbowl into space. Obvious when you think about it. I find her including Mr. Krabs and Squidward as her family is kind of inconsistent with the series, but it comparatively feels redundant to the bigger issues. I mean, generally, from the second movie onwards, the core cast kind of just abandoned their dynamics in the show to form one gang. Of course, the space travel resolution works seamlessly, and they land back in Bikini Bottom exactly where it was. I'm not necessarily mad about that. That is something that would just happen in the cartoon.
Days later.
And yeah, the circus resolution is nice enough, it's fine. It's the resolution to a less than fine movie, but sure. Hey, even the scientists are enjoying the show, clearly with the same green screen head technique. They do establish they've been shrunk, but yeah, this still looks kind of bad. And we finish off in full circle form with another terrible song. And this time they perform the whole thing. That's nice, the bare minimum.
Hey, Pa, your girl done good.
It also kind of just sums up this movie as a whole, as it kind of repeats a lot of the I'm Sandy and I like science qualities of the first song. It's perfect. It highlights how little an insight this movie's given us into the character. This is what we would expect at the start of the movie, and besides her having a family, that's how we're ending it. If they'd dedicated more time to establish more of a rift between her and her family, this coming together resolution would have been somewhat rewarding. But they didn't. They gave equal screen time to the villain cutscenes instead. And just as you thought it was done, we get a final shot of that awfully rendered mutant fish version of the villain. Finn. The end. That's the movie. And now I'm sad. In measuring this franchise's decline, it's only fitting that this was released almost 20 years after the original SpongeBob SquarePants movie. What was once a series capable of a theatrically released film that was both financially and critically successful is now just one part of the chum bucket of movies being thrown onto Netflix. That was the terrible Sandy Cheeks movie. On that note, my name's been Daz. Thank you very much for reaching the end of this movie. What do you think of this movie? Let's hear all of your scathing reviews, and I shall see you in a little bit.